Hello and welcome. And this is weird for a live stream, isn't it? I'm actually talking to the camera with my face in front of the camera. If you're new here, my name is Lindsay Weirich. I am also known as the Frugal Crafter, and I have done a box with the Papercraft Society, which is a monthly subscription club. You can also buy individual boxes, and this has been in the works for a long time. And this live stream was actually supposed to be over on the Craft Stash Facebook page, but I did run into some technical issues this morning, so I figured rather than scrap the live stream, I would bring it here, and that way they can embed it to their page later and we can all have some good crafty fun. And I don't have to let doing my hair and makeup go to waste because that usually doesn't happen for a regular live stream. If you are here, if you could let me know if you could see or hear me, that would be great to make sure I'm not talking to an empty room. And we're going to get into some coloring tips for card makers because I think that can be the biggest one of the biggest challenges that we face when we're making cards is how do we color those stamped images, or maybe we like to print out digital stamps or print out clip art or other images from the computer. And you want to make them look good. So I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how you can make that happen over a variety of media. So we're not going to complete projects, but we are going to get our hands on a bunch of media. So no matter what you have at home, you will be able to make good use of those supplies. So I'm just going to take a quick look. Oh, good. People can hear me. My computer's over there. My camera's over here. I've got a platform where I'm going to be coloring from, so I'll be zoomed in enough. So hopefully my technical issues for the day are done. I'm going to knock on wood just to make sure. I shook the camera. I know I did. I'm used to having my camera mounted from the ceiling, so I'll have to be careful not to jiggle the table. We got a lot of people in the chat right now. That's wonderful. I will take questions in a while. So probably when I go to switch medias, I'll take questions in case anybody has any. So if I'm coloring along and you think of something like, gee, why'd you do that? Or how come mine doesn't work like that? Or whatever it might be, just kind of wait for me to ask for questions. And when I do ask for questions, type the word question in all caps, or you can use the @ symbol and type the Frugal Crafter and just click on that when it comes up, and then I'll get a big orange stripe that shows me that someone's trying to talk to me. Otherwise, the chat can go so fast that I could miss it. And if I miss it, then you can obviously send it again. Also, big thanks to my friend Joe, who is moderating the chat. He knows a lot of stuff. So if you've got a question in the meantime, he or any of the other crafty friends in the chat could probably help you out as well. So I just want to make sure that everybody is supported and we have some good crafty fun. So I'm going to move the camera down and you can kind of see some examples, and we're going to get to coloring. Excuse the awkward camera motion. All right. So here are some examples of some of the artwork that you're going to find in the Papercraft Society box. This one right here was a scene made with rubber stamps and then colored with watercolor. Now, before I did that, I took my, now this comes with watercolor postcards that you can decorate and mail off as postcards. So before I went and did my stamping, I took masking tape and I taped off the edges. And then I was able to do all my stamping and all my watercoloring. And you can see my paper stayed pretty flat because I taped it down. And then when I was done and my paper was dry, I removed the tape. And then I used the some of the die cuts that come in this set. And I'll show you those die cuts really quick. I have them on a magnet sheet, so they're handy for me. I used some of these postage edge die cuts here to edge my paper, and I made them as straight borders so that you can shape any card that you want. You can go end to end if it's a bigger page, like a scrapbook page. I just wanted this kit not to be something that's over in a month, or something that you know is so dated that like in 6 months you can't use it anymore. I wanted to make very practical supplies that you would use over and over again. So that's why we have the postage stamps and postage frames that you can make your own little embellishments with, and the little book plates, so you can make so you can die cut your own book plates out of like metallic paper or cardboard or whatever, buttons, things like that you'll use time and time again. I just didn't want to make something that was kind of transitional or fast fashiony, or I just wanted something that people would use time and time again. So so that's how we did that for that effect. Again, I used my borders here just to cut some matting paper for this. This is watercolor. This is watercolor sheets. Now, if you got the kit, you'll notice there's a little bookmark with these little watercolor sheets in it. They work very similar to using water-based markers or watercolors. This is colored pencil. This is alcohol marker, which is the first demo we're going to do today. And this is a mixed media where I used the watercolor sheets and then I went over it with colored pencil just to kind of bring a little bit of body and life. Whoops, let's move that and screen a little better into the piece. So no matter what you have at home, grab it and let's do some coloring together. I'm going to move these out of the way. And excuse me if I sound a little nervous. It was a little hectic this morning. Plus, we had like crazy snow last night. And I'm always nervous when the kids are driving to school when it's snowy. And Maisie was out the door early and she left her phone at home. So I couldn't even spy on her on my little parental spying app that tells me where my kids are. So it was very, very crazy morning. So I decided to use my tri-blend brush markers here for this demo because I know a lot of Craft Stash customers prefer these markers, and I thought it would just be a little bit less chaotic because it'd be fewer markers to have around. And I hope that is looking bright because it looks a little dull in my camera. Adjust my lights a little bit. This is a very pale pastel toned piece, so that's also why it looks kind of pale. I do have a photo. I snapped a quick photo and put it up on Instagram, but I'll also take photos of these and put them on my blog, thefrugalcrafter.wordpress.com. So you can have these up there to look at later if you're trying to color along at home. So the first thing we're going to do is actually an easy color, and that would be green. Now, for whatever reason, blending greens and browns and yellows and oranges are quite easy. So I recommend starting off, if you're doing a floral piece, to start off with some greens. And I'm going to show you a way that's kind of foolproof for blending. And I'm actually going to use, I like both of these blends. I'm going to start off with this one that is dull green blend. I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see what I'm doing. And one of the easiest ways to blend is to start with your lightest color. Now, you don't have to have these markers. You could just have 3 shades of a green marker. And I could go in with my lightest color, and I'm going to go in the light areas. If there's a really bright light area, I'm going to leave that alone. Then I can go in with my medium. Now this is like, especially if you have a harder to blend color, and I'm going to go in. I'm actually going to bring that up to where I want it a little bit darker on the edges. That's a pretty light green, so you really don't need to leave light. Any place you see that cross hatching, that's a great place to add a little bit of shading. And then I could go in with my very darkest. This is like my olden days of YouTube broadcasting. I'm working upside down so that I could have the face camera on too. And now I'm going to go back, and I'm going to go back into my medium and blend out that darker color. Now I'm looking at this color and I'm saying, this green, it is a dull green blend, but it's a little bit too dull for me. I wish it had a little bit more pop. So I'm going to go over with this first lighter color, and that's a pretty blend, but it doesn't look springy enough to me. So what I'm going to do at this point, because markers are transparent, that means you're going to see all your previous layers. When you put a new layer on top, I'm going to go in with this citrus, I think it's citrus green blend. I'm going to use that lightest color there, and I'm going to glaze over the whole thing. Now that's going to help things blend, and that's going to tint everything a little bit brighter and yellower. It's going to give it a little bit more life, like a spring green. And look how easy and how beautiful that blended, and how nice that looks. So remember, markers are transparent. If you layer over something, because you don't have all the markers in the world, nobody does. Sometimes you don't have the right colors that will blend really well. And when that happens, all you got to do is find another color to unify them and just go over top, go over the whole thing. Now for the stems, I like that dull green for the stems, that darker tone. So I'm going to go in, and I think I'm just going to add that in here, especially with a small area. I don't want to overblend, because if I get too much ink in there, what's going to happen is I'm going to end up with overspill. I'm going to end up with the colors feathering out. Now, the nice thing about these postcards that come in the Papercraft Society kit is that we chose paper that would work with whatever medium. I'm actually going to go to the medium green in the citrus blend to blend that out. So you can use this with your watercolors. You can use it with your alcohol markers. You can use it with your watercolor markers. You can use it with your inks. Now, the only downside to using these with alcohol markers is that it will bleed through the back. So that would be best for layering on a card like I did here. Now, you might see right there, you see how I accidentally colored outside of the lines? Don't worry if that happens. What you want to do is take a clear blending marker, and it can be any brand of clear marker. They all have ethanol or denatured alcohol in them. They all work exactly the same. And what you want to do is use the chisel tip. I'm just making sure that's nice and juicy. And then you're going to take that chisel tip and you're going to push that ink back into the lines. So you just kind of color over the mistake, the boo-boo, and it's going to push it back. It's really amazing. Now, a little mistake like that, you could leave it if you wanted to, but that works so well. And now you can't even see that mistake. And I think that is just a wonderful tip. Now, if you're using like a color like purple or red that really wants to stain the paper, you can touch it up with a white gel pen or some Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White, which is a really opaque gouache, something like that. So never throw this away. You make a little boo-boo, don't throw it away. Chances are when you send it to somebody, they're not going to notice it, but it's usually fixable. I rarely toss anything when I'm working when I'm making a card. So the next blend we're going to do, I'm going to set those aside. We are going to do these purple petals. Now, purple is a color that's hard to blend. So I'm going to take advantage of having a really, really pale marker. So let's do this petal right here. Now, when I have a tricky to blend combination, or when, if I'm a beginner, or maybe I've got a paper that doesn't want to blend very well. Anytime I'm in a situation where I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to blend too well, what I want to do is prime the area. Priming the area means you fill the area with a good saturation of ink in a very, very light tone. Once the paper's wet, it's going to be so much easier to be able to blend and color. So now I'm going to take my medium color and I'm going to just kind of flick it out because I have a brush tip. If you don't have a brush tip, use the chisel end of your markers. You're going to find the chisel ends work really well. If you don't have a chisel end, you definitely can use the bullet end. But the bullet end is better for smaller areas because a big area like this, you kind of want to flood it with ink. And that ink flood is what's going to give you that beautiful blend. So now I'm here in the darker tone. Now I want shadow underneath that curled petal there because that's going to give me some depth and dimension. It's going to be so pretty. I'm going to go back to my medium and merge it into the light. And then if I feel like I need it to blend a little bit more, I mean, this actually looks pretty good, but I will just finish over in the lighter areas with that light shade. Now, if I saw that and I'm like, oh, I wish that was more pink, or I wish that was more blue, I could glaze over that just like we did with our leaf. I could glaze over that with a very, very pale pink or very, very pale blue, or even a brighter pink if I, just depending on my preference. So then I'm just going to take that light shade and I'm just going to color this turned petal with that light tone. There, that's really pretty. And you'll notice that as it dries, it looks better. So if you find that it looks a little patchy, let it dry. Don't keep fussing with it. Just let it dry. You can always go over it again if you need to even it out, if it doesn't look good, but just be patient. Now, another way, once you get a little bit faster with your coloring, you can skip that priming step and you can go dark to light. And this is how I generally will color unless I have a really tricky color or a really large area. So in that case, what I would do is I would start with my dark, and you can tell where to shade because I put cross hatching, or I put hatching marks where you'd put your darker color. So this is kind of a easy postcards to color that I've included in the kit. And then I'm going to take my medium. I'm going to go over, you can go over all the dark if you want, or you can just overlap it a little bit. And I'm just going to bring it up like that. And then I'll go in my lightest and just kind of overlap that last color and bring it out to the edge. Now, if you want more intensity, you can keep repeating those steps until you've gotten it as bright as you like. Now, most of these markers have a pretty good blending combination, but sometimes you'll get a marker and it's like, man, that's a real big jump between the dark. Look how dark that dark is. And the light, look how light that light is. And the medium is on the lighter side. It's kind of a big jump. So when you have three colors like that, which it's really common when you're building your marker collection to have markers that aren't really close together, you'll want to do that priming technique. So let's do that. I don't have any really big petals left over here, but I'll show you right here. So I would again start with my lightest color. Then I would go in with my medium. Now this one, our shading is kind of in the middle where that petal kind of dips. And I go in with my darkest, which would be right on those hatch lines. Then I'm going to go back in with my medium. You can start to see the dimension being built there. I color right over all of the dark because that dark is quite a jump, I find. I actually really love the color. I have the original 24 of the tri blends that with the bullet tip, and I have the original 24 of the brush. I don't know if they have more brushes out now or not. I preferred the color combinations in the bullet tip ones. They went further apart, I think, for the brush because you can blend easier with a brush, but I kind of wish they kept the color blends from those original bullet tip ones. I really like those. I'm just going to darken that up a little bit with the medium tone. And I'm lightening up. So lighter colors over darker actually will lighten those darker colors. So like I thought that dark pink in there was a little too dark, so I just went over it with the medium. And there we have a beautiful blend. If I do the light to dark, well, I probably could here just because this areas are so small. But I mean, look how dark that pink is. It's a beautiful color though. So you can still do it. It's just a little bit more challenging when you have a big jump in color. Now, if you have any questions on on coloring with your alcohol markers, please post them in the chat now over on YouTube. You might be able to watch us on Facebook if it got embedded on the page. I tried to share a link, but it wouldn't let me. So if you're watching this anywhere other than YouTube, pop over to YouTube in the chat if you're watching it live. And if you have a question, you can go ahead and post it in the chat. Type the word question in all caps or at me so I can see your question. And in just a second here, I will go in and answer some questions. Now here, I decided just to use the two lighter colors because this petal is getting a lot of light. So I don't want to put that shadow color in there. These are pretty colors. I do like this. I do like these colors. It's just a big jump. And then if say these colors weren't very close together, I could do several petals at once. So just the more you use your products, the more you're going to be comfortable with how they blend and how you have to treat the different colors. Like I can go, if that's too bright, I can go back in with this lighter color. It's the same principle as how we erased with our clear blender. I can go back with that lighter color and lift and lighten those colors. And you're going to, if you can see the color bleed through to the back, then you have you're putting enough ink to blend. Now, honestly, when we get this all colored, I think that might be kind of a very soft pattern that you would be able to write over. But I still suggest, just plan on having to layer your image onto a greeting card like this if you're going to use alcohol markers. So I'm going to take a second and look at the questions and answer those. So if you're watching the replay and you want to skip ahead, that's totally fine. I get a question here from Grace. I am wondering which set of alcohol markers for art on a budget do you recommend? Well, there's a lot of different options, and I think it really depends on where you live and what stores you have access to. And also if you want a brush tip or not. These markers right here, I think they're about $5 per marker, maybe even less. And that gives you 3 colors. So that's pretty affordable, and the brush tips are pretty easy to use. You can also find really big bulk sets on Amazon. You just want to watch the reviews and make sure it's got the type of nibs that you want. But I find alcohol marker ink to be alcohol marker ink and not a huge difference between brands. So get whatever's in your budget that has the color palette that you like. Having a lot of pastels is very handy if you like to blend. B492 asks, don't the tips change color when blending? No, they don't. But if you did happen to get some contamination on a tip of your marker, just simply scribble it on some scrap paper. Even if it stains, it won't harm the marker at all. Okay, I'm scrolling back, see if there's any more questions here. All right, I think that we are caught up on questions, and I'm going to go over the next demo. So the next thing I want to work with is the color sheets here. This comes in the Papercraft Society box. You can also get these in booklets, and they're very similar to the Peerless watercolors. So if you have the Peerless watercolors, that would be totally fine to use. I think I will go for this one right here, this pretty rose, and let me get out the example here. Now we will do it first with watercolor, and then we can add some colored pencils to it after it dries. And we'll start with these color sheets here. I do have another one I can use traditional watercolors on, but I think we can do some with the Viviva and some with traditional colors just to save time and save, just to keep it concise and helpful, hopefully. All right, don't get distracted by the chat, Lindsay. Okay. In your kit, you're also going to find a water brush pen. Now, if you've never used these before, I know they're pretty common now. It's basically it's a brush, but it has water in the handle, so you don't have to dip. You will want to have a paper towel handy anytime you're using watercolors, or a rag, something like that, because when you need to change colors with a water brush, you don't have a bucket to rinse your brush in. So what you want to do is squeeze out water and blot it on a napkin or a rag, and that's going to be how you change colors. Don't worry if the tip of the pen gets stained, because that happens anytime you have a light bristle. So again, let's first start with a leaf. And there's a couple different ways that you can approach this, but my favorite way is actually to pre-wet an area. So I just dripped a little drop out. Can you see that? I think, is it showing the thing? So I just put a little drop of water, and now I'm just going to spread that around. And the neat thing about watercolor and even ink is that it's only going to want to go where your paper is wet, because it's kind of lazy. So now what I'm going to do is I think I'll grab some yellow and put in a little bit of a highlight on my leaf. Look how bright that is. It doesn't take very much. And then I'm going to grab a little bit of green, try and not get my hand in the paint. I'm going to add that in and blend it. Now, if you're on the go, maybe you're crafting at a friend's house, or maybe you're sitting in a waiting room somewhere, or maybe you're just sitting at the kitchen table and you don't want to have a big mess. This is great because you can do everything right here. When you wet the paper first, you can kind of mix your colors on the paper, so you don't have to get out an extra palette. Although I will say, I picked up just a little touch of brown. I will say that if you do have a palette, it does increase the versatility of your watercolor. So I will show you the difference of being able to mix on a palette in just a second. We'll get this one painted, and I'll bring over a little ceramic dish. And ceramic dishes, you got them in your cupboard. They make the best palettes. So there is a little leaf done with some highlight shading. We could use blue for the shading too. I use brown just to give it a little bit of an earthy vibe. So here I've got a little palette. Oops. Actually, I'll squeeze it out because I can use that. I want to clean my brush off. Now, let's see. I want to mix on my palette. So I think I'll take some yellow and some green. Maybe I'll add a little bit of blue to that. Let's see what we get. So there I have kind of a cool. I'm going to add a little brown to that because it's a little too bright. And when you mix on your palette, if your color's not quite right, you can keep on working at it until you get just the color you want. That's a nice, like, kind of sap green color. And I've got a light green there that I can use. Maybe get a little more green, a little more yellow in that. So there, I've got two colors there. So Now, I don't really need to pre-wet my leaf. I can go right in. I can pick up my lighter color. Sorry, I gotta move stuff. I don't want to drag my hand in the in any of the stuff. So I'll go in there with my lighter color, get that highlight on there. And then I can go right in with my darker color and blend it in. Now, if I had wet this is already pretty pale. If I had wet it first, it would be even lighter. Now, the wetter your paper is when you're using watercolors, the more it's going to change as it dries and get lighter. So that's something you want to keep in mind if you're doing backgrounds or anything like that, is the wetter the paper, the lighter the color when it dries. And that wet glossy paper always looks really, really bright and pretty, and then it dries and you're like, where'd my color go? But this is kind of gives you a little bit more of a careful, controlled approach. So it just really depends on what you like. There's no right way or wrong way. You just do the techniques that work for the look you're going after. You know, this is a little bit more of a softer look. This is more of a severe look. It just depends on what you like. All right, now I'm going to switch colors completely. So I really need to clean this brush good, because if I go, well, let me show you what happens. Let's show you what happens if I go into the red and I've got green on my brush. My brush is dirty and I've got green on it. I'm going to pick up some red and start coloring. I'll mix it on my palette and see what happens. Oh, that's not a very pretty color. Well, it's rusty. I guess it's pretty if I want rust, but it's not the pretty red that I need for my flower. So it's really important you get that extra color off of your brush. Now, this is a small barreled brush, so you might need to refill. Oh, I'm going to show you a really great trick for refilling these. I save these little, these are, if you ever buy like flavor enhancers for bottled water, they come in these little containers. And if you grasp them really good and twist them hard, you can get the lid off and you can wash them. And they are perfect for filling your water brush. And I'll show you how. You unscrew this the opposite way. So if you've got one of these before and you're like, how do I fill that thing? I'm just going to dump this out so I can fill it again. I know that's silly, isn't it? You open it up, you put them, you just marry up the holes there, and then you give it a squeeze and it fills it up perfectly. And these are nice and flat and compact. They're great to stick in your travel bag, and they're perfect for filling these up. And I think you guys might even get in. I know I have a lot of viewers from the UK today, and the time difference and whatnot. I think some restaurants do like soy sauce in little containers like that you could wash out. So you just be creative, look and see what you have and see what you can save for this purpose. Also, clean your palette. If you've got a color you know you're not going to use, wipe it away. You can save the other colors for later. They will reactivate. So any watercolor dried on your palette, as long as it's not contaminated and it looks like something you'll use again, you can use it again. So this red here is more of like a scarlet. It's not a pinky red. So keep that in mind if you're using these colors. But again, I'm going to show you a couple different ways to do a petal. So one way, you'll have dry paper and you'll start with your shadow areas and you'll go in with your loaded brush. But instead of reloading, what you'll do is you'll just keep painting until you run out of color, and that will give you a nice ombre effect from dark to light. Now remember, watercolor should look painterly. It shouldn't look perfect. If it's not transitioning light enough for you, you can just kind of squeeze off a little bit of that pigment and help it along. Now these color sheets are really more like ink, kind of like the stuff you'd find in your watercolor markers than traditional watercolor. So they do dry a little bit more permanent. So lifting them up once they're dry, is going to be a little bit more challenging. So that's a really easy way to get a dark to light blend. It's one color, so it's a little less complicated than doing it with markers. So let's do that one more time. We're going to start off with our dark color down here near the center where we've got our cross hatching. And we're just going to keep dragging it out with the water in our brush until we get to the edge, and it'll be lighter because more of the ink has been used up and it's feeding out more just plain water. If that technique doesn't feel very natural to you, another way you can do it is how we did that first leaf, and that is wetting a petal first. Now, do you notice that I'm skipping around here? The reason I'm doing that is because if I paint next to, and it doesn't really matter so much where we're doing all the petals, pretty much the same color. If I am working on a petal and it's still wet and I work on the petal next to it, they're going to bleed together and I'm going to have fuzzy edges. So that's why I like to skip around when I'm doing watercolor, when I'm doing a flower, and I do a lot of watercolor flowers, because it just gives me, it gives me that, those nice crisp edges that I want. All right, so if you want your colors to blend, your paper needs to be kind of shiny when you wet it. So if I'm going to tip that to the light, hopefully you can see the gloss there. There we go. My camera, my monitor is backwards whenever I'm doing live stream. So I'm like, I don't know which way to put things. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to go in with that darker color. I'm turning this because this is very awkward. And I'm going to spread it where I want it the darkest. I can also put some up here in the veins. And it just gives me a little extra time to get things blended out. So again, it's one of those situations, I'm wiping my brush off camera on the rag. It's one of those situations where you are just going to experiment with these different techniques and see what you like best for the most part. So the next thing I'm going to show you is using a watercolor palette, which I actually, I prefer, unless I'm like really tight for space. These are great for like tucking in your journal and going, but I really love traditional watercolors, and you don't have to spend a lot of money to get a good set of watercolor. Oh, I just saw a question. Oh, if you have questions on these color sheets or watercolor in general or anything, you can go and post them. I just saw a question pop in, so I'm going to go answer that real quick. Let's see. Annette Fournier asks, I'm sorry I missed. What are those printed flower cards Lindsay's using? I don't see them in the description. Or in her favorite supply list she has. This is, so I designed this box for the Papercraft Society, and I've just got my prototype here. I don't have the actual consumer one yet. It was kind of crazy. This has been a crazy week, guys. But this kit contains dies, and it contains postcards for you to paint, these pre-printed postcards that can be used with alcohol marker, watercolor, color pencil. It contains rubber stamps like I used in this card here, die cuts, vellum, all sorts of goodies. And it's one of those ones that if you buy it today and you don't get around to using it for 3 years, everything is still going to be timeless and in fashion. I didn't want it to be one of these things where you buy it, you use it once or twice, and then it's all dated and old. So when I get my my consumer box, I will do an unboxing and share it on the channel. But yeah, that's what we're working on today. I'm just going to scroll back and see if there were other questions while I'm at it so I can stay on top of things. All right, I think that was ever questions. Okay. Susie Fick asked questions. Is this also available in the USA? Yes, I quickly linked to the Craft Stash USA page in the video description. You can order it in the USA. It is a UK company. They offer single boxes or subscriptions. So the neat thing about it is if you do subscribe, you have everything comes in these little folios that help you can organize your dies. And I'll see mine's all used up. I've used up everything in mine practically, but they come in these little folios. Oh my gosh, getting in camera. And then they have the information on the spine, so you can actually put them all on a shelf when you're done, and they all will stay uniformly organized. If that's something that's important to you, it's kind of a neat feature. So I'm going to use these inexpensive watercolors here. These are under $20 most of the time. And they're just a nice set of inexpensive watercolors. They're the Pretty Excellent paint set. They have a parrot on the cover. This is what it looks like. I got them on Amazon a few years ago, and they have been one of my biggest recommendations for budget watercolors. So when you've got a set like this, you actually have mixing space right on the tin, which is really handy. So the thing you might not realize about watercolors, if you haven't used watercolors since you were in school, is that Watercolors that are designed for crafters and for artists are much more concentrated. So let's say if I want to match that color, I probably want like a red like this, kind of like a scarlet red. I want to put that on my palette first because I want to make sure that's the real color, because look how dark they look in the pans. They look a lot different. And I might want to mix another color in. I think I need that a little bit cooler in temperature. So I'm going to add this cooler crimsony red to it. And I'm going to get just the right color I need before I bring it to the paper. But I can do the exact same techniques I did before with a water brush and with, well, there's supplies here. So I can do this wet on dry, where I start in with my darker shadow and let it fade out. Now, I will say with a traditional watercolor, you have a little more time, because ink kind of grabs to your paper and just wants to be a part of that paper, wants to be color fast. That's why they use those inky dyes when they dye fabric. So because it seeps into the pores and it stays nice. I'm going to blot a little of that off. But watercolor is a little bit more viscous and it sits on top of the paper. It doesn't really absorb into the paper. So you got a little more time. I just fed out a little too much water there. So now we're going to sop some of that up. And that can be one of the issues with a water brush that you have to watch out for. If you give it a squeeze to get a little bit of water, you could be surprised. So it's better to squeeze over a palette. I flew a little close to the sun there, friends. And then if I have any hard edges, I can just go back and kind of scribble my brush over it and soften them up a little bit, get them to reblend together. And if I don't have enough of a dark, or if my color doesn't look quite right, I can adjust it. I think I need a little bit more of this pinkier red in there, and I'm going to go in and add that. So I think a lot of people think that with watercolor, you've got one shot. That's not the case at all. You can keep playing with your color until you get it just the way you want. So maybe water brushes aren't your thing. Water brushes are not my first choice unless I'm traveling and I don't have very much space. I really prefer a regular brush. So I'm going to grab a regular brush and we can work with that. But I'm going to do the same technique with a regular brush this time. I'm going to wet it. I'm going to get some color here, nice and concentrated. I want the consistency of like milk, basically. And I'm going to go in here where I want it to be the darkest. I might even pick up some color from the pan where I want it really dark. And that right in there in the center. Then I'm going to swish my brush in the water. I'm going to blot off the extra. You pick up some lighter tone. And I'm going to go over this and kind of spread it out. I'm going right over the dewdrops because I'll show you how to color the dewdrops in a bit. And that's not quite dark enough, so I'm going to, again, go right off the pans, pick up some concentrated color, add it right back into the dark. Always adding my shadow in at the same place and then just feathering it out so I get a nice, more uniform look. I can bring in some of the shadow on the crepey wrinkles. If you get a drop of water on the ferrule of the brush, you want to wipe it off because it will slide down and it will ruin your coloring. I want this little part that's turned under a little darker, so I'm going to go right in there with that. And then I want to put a shadow under my dewdrop, so I'm just going to go under the dewdrop while it's damp and just put a shadow underneath. And then I'm going to do a shadow on the inside of the dewdrop on the opposite edge. And then we'll just dot it with a white gel pen for the highlight, and that's really all there is to dewdrops. I could do this one over here while I'm at it too. All right, and now let's do a wet and wet petal so you can kind of see how that goes. And then we'll demo some color pencil over top, and we can do some color pencil on its own too, just so you can kind of see how to deal with that. So here I'm just going to wet this petal, and the two adjacent petals are pretty dry now, so I'm not too worried about feathering. And I'm going for a uniform sheen. And I'll take some questions on watercoloring after I'm done this petal, if anybody has any. So that's wet. It's got a nice sheen to it. I'll just tip it to the light so you can see what I mean. Hopefully I can catch the light. There we go. See how it's nice and shiny? And I am going to pick up my color. But the petal's wet. So what do we know about when our paper is wet? When our paper is wet, it is going to dry lighter. So we probably want to have a little more thicker, more concentrated paint on here. I'm just trying to match the colors that I had on the Viviva sheets. So that's why I'm using those two reds. Otherwise, I'd just pick one. And look, it's starting to flow. Sometimes you can just like put the color in and let it do its thing, and it's just what you want. And I love it when that happens. I like that highlight in the middle because it makes the flower feel kind of like curled. And I kind of like that. I think I'll just let that dry, and I think that looks nice the way it is. And then like something like this where you have a curled over petal, I'm just going to thin down my paint, and I would just paint that with that just a lighter shade than what I already have. But that's basic watercoloring. I mean, just with this, with no colored pencil on top or anything, I think there's a lot of really nice depth there. And I think it would be delightful to send to anybody. And because it's watercolor, we shouldn't have any bleed on the back. See, there's no bleed on the back. You may have a little wrinkling, but I don't think that's much to worry about. You can actually flip it over and iron it with a household iron if it bothers you. But I mean, it's going to go through the mail. I wouldn't worry about it too much. And if you're worried about things damaging your postcard in the mail, you can what I tend to do if I'm worried about it, I take a piece of canning wax you can get at any grocery store, and I rub just the white clear paraffin canning wax over it. I rub it over it firmly, and then I heat it with a hair dryer or a heat tool just to kind of like let it seep into the fibers of the paper. And that does a great job at waterproofing it so it can go through the mail without making it shiny or weird or anything. And it's a real cheap option too. All right, I'm going to check out the questions. We have a question from Maggie. When sending watercolor postcards to the mail, I knew what you were going to ask. I am the, what do you call it? Omniscient host. Okay, so I just answered that. Yes, you could put them in an envelope, but I think it's fun to send postcards, so I would just send them. I would wax them and hope for the best. I think they would be fun, and plus cheaper to mail too. At least in the United States, it's cheaper to mail postcards than mail. I know in the UK they don't charge extra for like square cards versus rectangle cards. They charge more for square cards here, but yeah, cheaper to mail postcards. Yeah, I'm just looking to see. Oh, somebody's asking, will this be available on Amazon? The box is available through Craft Stash, and they have an American site and also a UK site. I'll put the UK site link in the video description after I'm done broadcasting. I was just this is kind of a last minute change of plan, so I just tried to get the basics in before we went live. Angela Shook asks, when will this be ready for order? I did see it for sale on their website this morning, and I believe you can get the single box. I believe. Oh gosh, don't hold me to it. I could have been misreading. It was pretty chaotic this morning. Thank you, Stacy. She says she's excited and waiting for this day. Aesthetic, I might be pronouncing that wrong, says I have the Ohuhu water brushes, but after seeing this, I can't say I've been using them right away. Thanks for showing this. Yeah, you know what? I'll grab some water-based markers, some real brush pens, and show you the same thing with the markers. Why don't we do that since I'm right here? We're all hanging out. Excuse the faraway sound because I'm going and grabbing a few markers just so that I have so I have something to demo with. I should have grabbed those out. I will grab a couple Tombos and a couple real brush pens just to give you a little bit of a variety here. They're probably not going to be the exact colors of what I have been using, but we can make do. That's what we do, right? We're crafters. We make do. We figure it out. We make it work. We're like Project Runway. We make it work, people. Okay, so these are real brush pens. So they are water-based markers that have bristles, instead of a fiber nib. And these are really easy to blend. These are like a piece of cake to blend compared to, say, the Tombos. So I'll show you how I do these, and it's very easy. The thing, anytime water-based markers, you want to make sure you don't overwork the paper, because then you can get pilling. And even on watercolor paper, you just got to be real careful. But these are so gentle on your paper that it's a lot easier. So what I would do is I would go in with a darker color, and any brand, any brand is fine. I've used many of them, and other than like there's some brands that are easily refillable. I find that as far as using them, there's not a big difference. So I go in with my dark first, excuse me. And then I take my letter color and blend that out. And how easy is that? And another thing you can do, and I don't think I have mine handy, but you can use a Wink of Stella pen to blend these out. You can use a water brush pen to blend these out. There's a lot of options. Look how pretty that is. And look how easy. Now to do that with like an alcohol marker, that would take more time. So it's a really great solution for coloring. And these are way cheaper than, say, like alcohol markers, Copic markers, stuff like that. You can get a pack of like 36, which is a really good combination. 24, 36, you don't need a ton of colors because they blend so well. You can get a pack like that for probably, I don't know, $20, $25, and, blend until the cows come home. It's so easy. Look at that, You really can't beat it. Now you can go back in and add more. And the reason these don't pill the paper and the felt tip ones do, even though it's essentially the same ink, is because the felt tip nibs are more abrasive. Okay, look how easy that is. I'm going to cap these guys back up. So you want to cap them up. They will dry out. Now these are not like a water brush. They have actually a pad on the inside, just like a regular marker, that keeps you from dripping out a lot of ink. There are ink-filled brush markers that are wonderful. Oops, I got the caps on wrong. They are wonderful, but they are going to feed you out more color, and they could be a little more challenging because of that fact. They do have more product in them, so they might be a better buy for you, but they're going to feed more color. I have no idea if these are a good match. I gotta scribble them out to see. Wow, look at that one. See, that's why you gotta swatch markers, because the lighter one is actually darker looking. We'll try it. We'll see how those look. This is definitely more pink than the other ones I have. I'm just gonna grab an even lighter tone. Let's see. And some brands I've noticed blend better than others. So for some reason, this is darker. That's medium and that's light. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do one of our petals like that. We got one right here. We can do that's pretty big. So I'm going to start off. Now, another drawback with the felt tip pens is they can get kind of frayed. And once they've frayed, they're difficult to get details in. Going with that darker color. Tombows I found have the best tips that tend not to fray. So I'm just going to overlap a little bit. But then these Tombows right here are pretty old, so you can't fault them. I've had these. I got these secondhand, and I've had them for like 12 years. So, and then I'll do the lighter color. This is a Memento. The Mementos do not blend as well. I will tell you that. But that's what I had a really pale color in. So if you look at this, yes, I got some blending, but they're not blending as much as I would like. And I can start to feel that I am abrading the paper there. So what you can do is actually scribble your color on your palette, like I did here when I was testing them. And I could pick this up with my lightest color. And yes, it may stain the tip, but I can start coloring with that darker color, and as I bring it out, hopefully you can see that. As I bring it out, the darker color gets used up on my marker, and I end up with the lighter color that's the color of the pen. And you can, of course, scribble this out if you feel like you still have some of that color on there. So that's another way that you can do that. Or you can even scribble your markers on a dish and use whatever like water brush you have or paintbrush you have in water to go ahead and blend them out on the paper. And that also is less abrasive because you're using a paintbrush. So there's, whatever you have, there's a solution on how you can use it. And I was so glad that we could find a paper that was going to respond to so many different mediums. So no matter what you have, if you don't have anything, you can use the color sheets that come with it. But if you have a favorite medium, then you can use your favorite medium, which I think is really nice. Okay, so there was some demos with water-based markers. Brush markers are a game changer. I'm so glad they've come out, and they're pretty affordable now. Any brand are going to be fine of the real brush markers. I think I think especially for the price, they've come down in price so much that they're about the same as a felt tip one, and you get the real bristles, and it's just a dream to use. I'm going to see if there's any other questions before we move on to colored pencil. Jonathan Southwell asks a question: what is your favorite part of the box you've created? Like, what would be your go-to item in other projects? I will show you my absolute favorite thing that has been killing me not to be able to use in videos yet, but now I can that it's out, is the postage stamps. Because I love to do faux postage for like decorations. I love little stamps and rubber stamps of stamps and postmarks and things like that. So that's my favorite. And also the postal edge dies, I think. I'd probably say the dies in general, which is really funny because I'm not a huge fan of die cutting, but this is the type of die cutting I like to do. I will get my scraps of the precious paper, like the metallics and the embossed, the real gorgeous, thick, nice paper that's like $2 a sheet, and you save every scrap because it's so precious. I take that and I cut out the buttons and I cut out the photo corners and keep them in little dishes and make a bunch. I made a bunch of the posters. I probably have them right here, actually. I'll show you. These were fun. I made a bunch of these postage stamps. I took Avery white full sheet labels, so it's basically like a sticker sheet, and I cut a bunch of these, and then I made myself a couple little masks because there's two different size postage things here. So I made myself some Post-it tape masks with just the little holes cut out. That would be like the inner part. And then I can mask off my edges so I can just like ink and stamp and make all kinds of little postage stamps like I did on, which card was it? This card here. Actually, I did it on a couple cards. So I made the little postage stamps, and those are so cute and so fun. So that's my favorite because I love to make my own supplies like that. I like to have something unique, and I like to have supplies that let me be really versatile and create more things from them. So I don't have supplies that look like every other Cardmakers. So those are my favorites out of the box. I think it's hard to pick. I also like the postcards that are already drawn because then I can just have fun chilling out and coloring. All right, can we do colored pencil? I think we can keep using this for colored pencil. I'm going to set this aside. We're going to do, again, we'll grab some pinks and we will grab some greens. Let me know if you want to see watercolor pencil too, because I've got watercolor pencils handy and I could do the exact same with that if you're interested. I guess I didn't know. I wasn't going to have, I'm probably going to go a little long here because it's on my channel. I was going to keep it to around half an hour, 45 minutes on Craft Stash, but hopefully nobody minds. RG asks, what brand is that for the markers that I use? I'll take a quick peek. For the felt tips, I have a Tombow, I have a Memento, and I have a Marvy. Tombow would be my pick out of felt tip ones. For the brush markers, I have Arteza and Genuine Crafts. And honestly, I've used so many different brands, and I like most of them for the brush tip ones. I don't find a big difference. Zig has a smaller tip to it, but they all come to fine points, so I don't think it really is worth paying the extra money to get the finer tip, to be completely honest. I need a lighter pink. Let's do this color here. I'm probably going to need to sharpen, but we can get going. And for greens, and I'm using Prismacolor here, but please use whatever you have. There's so many wonderful budget brands nowadays. And if you're in the UK and you have a trouble finding Prismacolor, because I know they're an American company, try Derwent Colorsoft. They're very similar. Okay, now ideally, you probably want to have this a little bit sharper. I'm going to sharpen these. So if you're wearing headphones, please take your headphones out for a moment because I'm going to be using an electric and I am bringing it away from my sharpener, but it will be a little loud. I highly recommend an electric pencil sharpener when you're using soft lead pencils because soft lead pencils are very finicky. That one's sharp enough. So they want to break it in regular sharpeners because you end up rocking them when you're sharpening them. When you use an electric sharpener, you hold the pencil still and the blades move around it. And that really reduces the fatigue. And I would also not sharpen them super, super pointy. Like you want them pointy, but not like a razor needle point, because then you will end up snapping them as you're coloring. Okay, so let's do a regular, just kind of dark to light blend here. I've got 3 different shades of pink, of kind of like peachy, I say kind of corally reds. Wonder if I should go with a different. You know what? I'm actually going to grab a different postcard because I don't have any. I want to show this on a big petal. And I'm going to start it with my darker color, not a lot of pressure. And if you have arthritis or other strength issues, using a softer pencil is really going to be a lot easier for you. And you won't have to put as much pressure if you have a sharper point. So I'm just doing like tiny little circles, but you don't have to be too fussy with it. And I'm using more pressure, but not a lot of pressure, where I want it darker. And then I'm feathering it out. I'm going very little pressure. So when I asked for these cards, when I sent my artwork and I asked for the cards to be made, I wanted a watercolor paper that was not going to be really rough. I wanted more of like a hot press or soft press, and I wanted it on a paper that would be marker compatible. So we were talking about Bristol, but we ended up finding a watercolor paper that was going to work. So if you just have one pencil, there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with varying your values just by varying your pressure. That looks really pretty, and there's no reason you need to spend 3 hours coloring your card if you don't want to. That's lovely. But if you want a more a look that's got a little more body to it, then you'll want to use some more colors and really fill in that tooth. So now I'm going to go in with my lightest color, and I am going to start at the edges where I know it's going to be lighter. And again, I'm coloring with not a lot of pressure. What I don't want to happen here is I don't want to fill in the tooth of the paper. So the tooth of the paper is basically the little hills and valleys. Even on smooth paper, there is some tooth. It's the little hills and valleys that grab the pigment. So now you're thinking, Lindsay, that doesn't look that looks worse. You've just put in that color and you've just undone all of the value shifts from the first one. That doesn't look very good. So, but we're not done yet. If you don't like the way your work looks, you're not done. So now I'm going to take this middle tone, and very little pressure. Again, I'm going to start going over my shadows and bring it into where I want some middle values. Now, as I'm doing this, I'm noticing that the paper isn't taking as much pigment. So I like to get my darks in and my lights in first. Now, everyone has their own techniques. This works for me. And now I'm going to go back in with my dark and a little bit more pressure. Now, you don't want enough pressure that's going to snap that lid. You don't want that tip. You don't want enough pressure that your arms are going to be sore. You don't want to be getting carpal tunnel syndrome from your hobby. I'm not using a lot of pressure here. If you're heavy-handed, you may prefer a firmer pencil. And there's a pencil for every person right now. All right, I'm thinking that's looking pretty good. I'll bring that to the camera so you can see this step right here. I feel like it looks really dark, but it's so hard to tell. It's so hard to tell from my monitor. I'm going to start blending. So I'm coloring a little more firmly. I'm merging those colors together. I'm getting rid of the grain in the paper. The grain of those little specks, the little specks of white that you see. And go one more time and go in and deepen up any of the darker areas that I want. And then this last trick, and this is why I recommend you have a white pencil, a good quality soft white pencil, and that could be a Prismacolor white, it could be a Derwent Drawing Chinese white, it could be a Derwent Color Soft white. These are all products that are available open stock, which means you can just buy that pencil. You don't have to buy a whole set. Then I like to go in and add my bright highlights, and I'm really gonna press fairly firmly. I mean, I'm not like gonna hurt my wrist or anything. Actually, what is this? This is a oh, this is a Holbein white. And I'm just going to press and bring those brighter highlights to the forefront. And then on top of that white, you're really not going to be able to put much because you've put quite a bit of pressure down at that point, and you've really filled that up. And that's how I would get a nice blend on a petal. Now, if it's not smooth enough for you at this point, what you can do, you've got a lot of pigment down, you can blend it with a solvent. You could use, in America, we use Gamsol or odorless mineral spirits. I think Zest It is a popular product in the UK, or you can even use our old friend that we remember from our marker segment. We can use our colorless blender marker, which just contains alcohol. And just kind of go over it, and it will merge those colors together. And then when you're done, you just scribble it on some scraps to remove that extra wax from the pencil. And that's an optional step. You don't have to do it. I'm just going to grab a scrap and show you what I mean by cleaning the nib, which is probably pretty self-explanatory, but I'll show you anyway. And the nibs stain. The nibs do get stained. It doesn't hurt a thing. I just scribble it until it's clear. And that's all there is to it. And like a lot of markers, you can buy a replacement nib because it can be kind of hard on your nibs, can wear them out, but not right away. And if you're using like, this is an Art and Fly, they have replacement nibs. Copics have replacement nibs, or use your chisel nib if you're worried about damaging. So there was a petal. Now we can do and look, you can mix and match. I mixed and matched Prismacolor and Holbein there. I have a 36 of Holbein, and I put them with my Prismacolors because I'm like, I'm never using my Holbeins. I'm just going to put them with my Prismacolors, so I actually use them. And there's a tip for you. Use your supplies in a way that makes you, or store your supplies in a way that makes you use them. And we'll do a petal right over here since we've got this out. We've got a nice big one. You can go light to dark, or you can go middle tone out. It's completely up to you. In fact, we could do a middle tone out just so I can show you that technique. With this, you've got to be real careful not to overdo it. So using your pencil at an angle will prevent you from putting too much down. Very little pressure. Hold at the end. If you're holding at the end, you can't put too much pressure down. Very, very light. You get that base in there. Then I would go in with the dark. And I personally like to go with my darks first, just because I want to make sure I can get the saturation I want. And I use a lot of budget pencils. I review a lot of budget pencils, and I find that if I don't get those darks in and I don't save my lights out, then it becomes more difficult to lay them down later because there's more wax versus pigment in some of those budget pencils. So it just kind of gives you a little bit more versatility. I got my darks in. I still have a lot of tooth of the paper left. I hope that's big enough on your screen. I'll show you at this stage. I'll bring it up a little bit so you can see. Then I'm going to go in with my mid-tone. It's kind of like a leaf green color. Oops. I'm going the mid-tone again, I should say. Oh, no, this is a light tone. This is the light of the one I picked out. And actually, I think I can burnish at this level and have a really nice leaf. Now, burnishing, in case you don't know that term, that just means that you color firmly and you kind of polish it. It kind of polishes it, and it helps blend everything together. This Holbein's a little harder. It's a little crumblier than my Prismacolor. So I'm just going to tap that off over my trash. I'm going to go in with my dark again, just to make sure I have those darker tones. Grab my mid-tone. Just kind of blend it out. So when you're blending, you use a little bit more pressure than when you're layering. I don't do a ton of layering, but this pressure, I am feeling a little bit of strain in my forearm. So I want to be mindful of that. I don't want to develop a carpal tunnel. And then I could add a little bit of white to the edges, and I could leave that as is, or I could blend it out um, with my pen, with my blending pen, or with some odorless mineral spirits. It just is completely up to you. Now, the benefit of using colored pencils versus the other mediums that we've used today is that you can actually use those on, you can use them over something you've already painted, because they're a little bit opaque. They'll show up. They're semi-opaque, especially if you go with a wax-based pencil. And also, you can use them on toned paper. So you can use your rubber stamps. You can stamp on, you could stamp on a craft paper or a navy blue paper or an ivy paper, or you could use white ink and stamp on black, and you would color that way. So you do have that ability. I think it's nice to have the color pencils for the fact that if you can adjust. It's like, well, I wish I had a little more definition on that leaf. So what I'm going to do is just go in with this dark and do some shading. You don't even have to burnish or blend or do anything. You just add a little bit of shading and you increase that depth. Or maybe you're like, that's too dark. I wish I had some highlighting. That's just too dark over on that side. I can go in and I can soften that a bit. I think I need a Prismacolor for that. Prismacolors and Derwent Color Soft are the most opaque pencils. I'm going to scribble this off. I can see I have some like oil pastel, because I like to use my pencils with oil pastels too. I can go in and I can soften. I can tone that right down. If I don't like a color, I can adjust it. So it's kind of like a little airbrush. You go in and you can adjust things, which is really nice. I can go in and look at a petal and be like, I didn't leave enough white there. I wish that was lighter. I can go right in with my white colored pencil. I can add highlights. I can add veining. So it's just very, very versatile. And another thing I love is a white gel pen, because if you got a dewdrop, hopefully this is ready to roll. If you got a dewdrop, you just go in there and you touch it with a white gel pen and you add your highlights. That shows up a little bit more because it's darker. But yeah, there's all sorts of ways you can mix your mediums together to get a really nice effect. Now I'm going to look again at the chat, and if there's any other questions you have before we go, I'll just put up our our finished cards there so you can see. I'll answer those questions right now. Oh, I can show you another. This is all just colored pencil with nothing else. You can see that there is some texture in the blending, but I could have blended that out with a clear marker, but I thought it was kind of pretty, so I left it. Gives it kind of a fabric-y look. So it just depends on really on the look that you're after. I'm trying to keep this all in frame. I'm failing. There we go. Okay. Let's see what we have for questions here. Let's see. Oh my gosh, we might not have any. And in that case, we will be all done. RG asks, do you have any paper recommendations, or really what to look for in cheaper paper for practice? I think one of the best all-around papers that will work with watercolor markers, alcohol markers, inks would be Bristol. And I prefer a smooth, but they also make one that's got a little bit of texture to it. So you can get smooth, which is, I think, also referred to as plate sometimes. And then there's vellum, which has a little bit of texture to it. I really like that. I've used Strathmore. I've used Canson, the Canson XL Bristol, which I haven't seen recently, but that was quite a steal. That works really well. Because it's a cellulose-based paper, but has a good amount of sizing, it will work well for markers and not just drain them dry. And it also has enough sizing for your watercolors to sit on top of the paper. Now, I wouldn't want to complete a watercolor painting on Bristol, but for card making, because it's smooth, it stamps really well. It has enough sizing to deal with watercolors for stamping. There's also a paper by Fabriano that comes in a 50 or 75 sheet pack, depending on how thick you want the paper. It's around USD, I would say it's around $20 to $30 a pack. It's a Fabriano studio paper, and I believe Fabriano's out of Italy, so they should be available all throughout Europe as well. That I really like their hot press paper. And I use that a lot in my classes when I'm teaching stamping and coloring classes in person. So Bristol or the Fabriano hot press, you really can't go wrong. And you can get smaller packs if you don't want to buy that much. All right. Gosh, I think that we might be caught up unless any have just come in. All right. Well, I'm going to put the camera back up again and hopefully I'm probably really close to it. Oh, there we go. Oh, look at that. You got a bird's eye view of my dark roots. Time to visit Miss Clairol and take care of that. Well, I want to thank you for hanging out with me today. Obviously, I can't see the chat 'cause it's over there, but and rolling with the punches and finding me here over on YouTube if you were expecting this on Facebook, because that's what the plan was. But hey, we are crafters. We make it work. We improvise and we create. So I wish you a very creative day. I hope you have a very happy holiday season. Merry Christmas if you celebrate. Happy New Year if I don't see you until then. And thank you so much for supporting me on this journey and checking out my Papercraft Society box. It was so much fun to put together. I'm really proud of the supplies that we put into it, and I hope you enjoy it if you are a subscriber and you received it, or if you choose to purchase it in the future. I hope you have many, many, many hours of crafting pleasure from it. So with that, I will bid you adieu. Thank you so much for watching. Please give me a thumbs up on this video on YouTube before you leave. It really helps out my channel. And until next time, happy crafting. Bye. And I'll awkwardly end the live stream.